Hey and welcome, I'm Todd, and we're going to have another study today that we call What in the World, studying some of the parables of Jesus that maybe don't have the clearest answers to us today, but want to try to understand them better. Let's have a prayer and then we'll begin. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful to you for this time that we have to study your word. We're thankful that you have given us your word and that you have made it so that we can all understand it and live lives in your service. We're thankful more than anything for your Son, Jesus Christ, and for his sacrifice. We ask that you would help us to be like him every day. We pray this in his name, and amen. All right, so today, if you would turn to Luke 16, we're going to look at a parable that really was kind of the inspiration for the name of this class being What in the World. And obviously that title also is about what do we do with these parables in this world. But there are parables, in particular the one we're going to look at today that some people call the unrighteous steward, that it's hard to understand exactly what the point was if we don't look at it in the right way. I think we'll find today that there are some clear answers as to what is the purpose of this parable, because clearly Jesus had a definite purpose in what he was doing. But this is one of those ones that you read and you think, how could this be? What exactly is being used here and why? And so turn to Luke 16 and we'll look there. Now, as a point of reference, this is right after the parable of the prodigal son that has been told. And so we do have to relate it because it is a similar topic, some similar concepts in there. But I just wanted you to know that for a point of reference. So let's start by just reading the parable that Jesus tells. And it says, by the way, that he's telling this to his disciples. The prodigal son seems like it was told to more of a multitude, more of a large group of people. We don't know exactly what changed in the group of people, but in this case, it says at the beginning that he's speaking to his disciples. So let's look there in Luke 16, starting in verse 1, and read a little bit. In verse 1 it says, "Now he was also saying to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be manager.' The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes.' And he summoned each one of the master's debtors, and he began saying to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, 'Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, 'And how much do you owe?' And he said, 100 measures of wheat. he said to him, "Take your bill and write 80. And his master praised the unrighteous manager because he acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. Now I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings." We're going to stop there, and we're going to continue because Jesus continues, but I want to look at this parable that he tells and look at the story and try to get a good, just capsulize it and understand what point he's making here. So first of all, when he tells this story, I think our immediate reaction to this is that we don't understand the basis. He says there was a rich man who had a manager, and this manager, I think we would compare that to an accountant or a property manager, a bookkeeper that someone has. Most of us middle-class people don't have this kind of person, but this is a rich man, and he has a property manager. And it says, and this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And now this squandering word is one that he used similarly in the prodigal son. I heard D. Bowman say one time, he said, you hear so many people use the word prodigal in the wrong way, as if prodigal meant went away for a while or has been gone. No, prodigal means squandering. It means it has done wrong. And so, it's this idea here that squandering means he took this rich man's stuff and he just was wasting it and was not handling it properly. And so it says it was reported to him. So the manager found out that he was mishandling his money. And he called him and he said, and I like even the language that's used here, "What's this I hear about you? Give me an accounting." And it basically he says, "Let me see the books." And that's what any business manager does whenever he's concerned. If he's thinking things aren't in good shape, he'll say, "Let me see the books." And he says, "Give me an accounting of your management because you can't be my manager anymore." I call this the jig is up. That, okay, the manager has been probably living large for a while, been going through this and not getting caught. And now it's time to make an account. And obviously, I think there's an obvious lesson we're going to see there, one of these sub-lessons in this, that everybody's going to have to give an account, and at some point, it's up. And in this case, he says, "You can't be my manager anymore." And it's such an interesting reaction that Jesus teaches here that this person has, where he says, the manager says, "What am I going to do? He took my management away. This is my job." And he says, "I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg." It's like, this is the reaction of the manager, that he's been caught. He knows he's going to lose his job, and he thinks, well, I'm losing my job, but what do I do now? And I think anybody who's lost a job has this thought, like, what am I going to do? What job can I get? In this case, the guy's like, I'm ashamed to beg for money. I can't dig ditches. And so he says, I know. I have an idea. I will do something to make sure that when I lose my job, I can stay in my friends' houses. Once again, I think this is a kind of what in the world moment when you read this, that this is part of a parable of Jesus, that this guy was losing his job and that he seems to be the hero of the story. And he thinks, you know what, I'm losing my job. Here's what I'll do. In order to make sure I can stay in people's houses after I lose my job, I'm going to go to them and curry favor with them by discounting their accounts. And so it says, he goes and he says, "How much do you owe?" And he says, "I owe 100 measures of oil." And he says, "Okay, just write 50. And then he goes to another guy and says, "How much do you owe?" And he says, 100 measures of wheat. And he says, "Just write 80. And this is what he does to help resolve this situation. Now, I want to say this. We made this point when we started this class, that there is a singular point to these parables most often. There are some sub-points. There are some little things, little lessons. But there is a general point to these. This is not the point. The point of this is not that he lost his job and found a creative way to stay in people's homes. Now, there is a lesson that comes from that, but he's going to make a point from that here in just a minute. So we don't need to say that the point here is, go and discount people's accounts so that you curry favor with them, even if they owe your manager more money than that. But he's making friends here. He's making friends here by discounting their accounts. and while he's still the manager. Now, so this is an interesting point, that while he's still the manager, he takes care of this and gets ready for when he gets fired. That's really the whole point here, is he's getting ready for when he gets fired. And it says that his master praised the unrighteous manager because he acted shrewdly. And so this is now, we're coming to the point that Jesus makes. It says, he was praised because he acted shrewdly. And it says, for the sons of this age are more shrewd in the relation of their own kind than the sons of light. And it says, and I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings. And so we're looking at this now generally, and we're going to talk for a little bit about what really his point is here. But I want to talk just a little bit about this general idea of squandering, because it comes into this, that this idea of how we handle money says something about us, and it prepares us for something. In fact, most of us are trying to save money, trying to make money to prepare for the future. And there are times where we squander it, and it hurts that. It messes that up. And so we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit, about what the message is here that Jesus is teaching about what we do with money in order to make preparation for the future. And that squandering that is something that hurts us and something that damages our preparation. And so I want to stop for a second here, and I want to have a little episode with you of stupid stuff Todd bought. And so we're going to have a little show and tell for you today, and take just a couple minutes. And I think you might relate to this. I know the men will probably relate to this, but I want to do a little session that I call Stupid Stuff Todd Bought. And I have some examples here that I'm going to show you. So the first thing I want to show you is in the category of tools. Things Todd bought in the tool category. So first of all, I'll show you this. This was bought recently. It wasn't terribly expensive. This is a rotary tool. I like DeWalt tools. I like them all to be the same color. So I bought this rotary tool because it matches my batteries. You'll notice that it is pristine, and it's because I got it thinking I would use it, and I've never used it. And I'm not even sure what I use a rotary tool for. I'm going to be totally honest with you, but I liked it and I bought it, and I'm hoping someday I will find a use for it. If you have a use for it, text me, because I'll be glad to let you borrow it, and I may not even ask for it back. So there's one thing. Here's another thing. This is a planer, I think. This is a planer, and you notice it looks a little bit older, even though the cable here is brand new and still in the wrapper. Because I bought this thinking I would use it, I'm going to guess 12 to 15 years ago, and I've never used it because I don't even know what you use a planer for. But I bought it, and I thought it would be great. Anybody out there who thinks you need a planer, I will give this to you. It's still brand new, and I'm sure there are people out there that might have use for it. In the category, here's another tool. Here is a clamp that I bought just recently. I bought this. I was working on a project. I needed a clamp, and I bought it while I was at Ace. And when I got home, I found out that I had 6 of them. Not another one. I had 6 of these already, and I went and bought another one. There's maybe the definition of squandering. In the category of, also Leatherman tool. Here's one still in the wrapper. It's a Leatherman tool. I also had one of these already, but I bought it brand new. Text me. I'll send it to you. It's yours. Technology. Here's some VR goggles I bought. These I bought, thought it would be neat for my kids, thought it would be neat. You remember back when everybody was talking VR? I bought this, and I used it once or twice. The kids used it. It's been in a drawer ever since. And VR just didn't take off like we all thought it would. Now here's another one that I know, and just be quiet, because I know you're going to make fun of me for this. But for a while, I collected pencils. I like pencils, and I decided that I'm going to I had some already. I already had kind of a small collection of pencils from when I was young. And I decided I'm going to start collecting pencils again. And so this is my pencils. This is a Rubbermaid completely full of pencils. And there are pencils in here. Here's a bag of pencils. This is one for every baseball team. This is their branded baseball team. Here's a new set of every football team. There is also one of these sets from when I was a kid, every single football team. If you're my age, you probably remember this. I have thousands of pencils, And they've been in this Rubbermaid for quite a while in Andrew's closet, and I love them, but no real use for these, except that I liked them. And I used to spend a lot of time on eBay looking for pencils, and now I have a giant Rubbermaid full of them. And it's kind of a neat set, but once again, no real use for them. If you got kids who might really think a pencil of a football team is neat, text me. Maybe I could gift them some. Anyway, so you get the point. I wanted to show you that this idea of how we spend our money, and I think we live in a time where what we do with our money says something about us, and it also puts us in a position to prepare for something in the future. Now, I'm not going to be talking to you about it, and I don't think Jesus here is talking about when we make preparation that it's for our retirement. Now, I think it is a good and moral thing to prepare for retirement and for us to have good money management and make sure that we are secure. That is not the point Jesus is making in this, that we need to make sure and save our money for retirement. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but I wanted to kind of show you that I certainly have, I could fill the day here telling you about stupid things Todd bought. I think you might have some of those too. But the idea there is we think about when we're spending money, when we're spending time, what is the use of that? And so we'll talk more about that here in a minute. So let's get back to our parable where he says, after the master found out what he had done when threatened to be fired, he says he praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. And so let's start there, that he said that the praising of this person was not because of the specific methods they did. Clearly he had done wrong and squandered his master's money. But he says he was praised because he acted shrewdly. And then he goes on to say, for the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. So let's talk about that. That is not a perfectly clear thing to us. I don't think that is language we use, and certainly we need to delve into it just a little bit. But I do want to make sure that we keep coming back to this idea that the praising was because of acting shrewdly. Now, the word shrewdly in I feel like I've said that word so many times it has no meaning now. But that word in our time means nefarious, means that a person is doing something scheming and maybe even dishonest. That is not the context here, that he's not saying he's being praised because he did something dishonest or scheming. It is because he acted smart and clever, and that he was very strategic in the way he did this. That's the idea of shrewd here. And so we see that because he was clever and because he worked hard and because he found a smart way of dealing with this situation, that's why he's being praised. And it helps us to understand this more when it goes on here. And Jesus says, the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And it uses this word own kind. Sometimes it means in this generation or in this time. But we need to know who the sons of this age are and the sons of light. And so the sons of this age refer to people that are secular, people that are worldly in this time. He's talking about businessmen of the first century. This is people that are focused on secular, worldly things that are not spiritual. And he compares that to sons of light. I want to read a couple verses to you that I think are interesting. John 12 and verse 34. This is where we use this idea of light and how people are sons of light. And so John 12 and verse 34, we'll look there. The crowd then answered to him, we have heard out of the law that Christ is to remain forever. And how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is the Son of Man? So Jesus said to them, for a little while longer the light is among you. Walk while you have the light, so that darkness will not overtake you. He who walks in the darkness does not know where he goes. While you have the light, believe in the light, so that you may become sons of light. And so that's just one example of this idea of him calling people sons of light. Another one is in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 4. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. And so this idea here that people are sons of light is common, and there are a couple, he uses it here for the people who walk in the light, people who have Christ and follow him. And he also sometimes just uses this as his disciples, as these followers of him that were teaching, that he calls them sons of light. And so what he's saying here is that people, the businessmen of this age, the people who are shrewd businessmen of this age, work harder on that than you do on the gospel, than you do with your money using it for good, perhaps. And so he says after that in verse 9, "And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings." And so he refers to the wealth here as, we might say, I think they call it mammon or unrighteous mammon, but this says the wealth of unrighteousness. It's almost like he's saying fickle money, just money that is not eternal, things that are temporary and not important. He calls that the wealth of unrighteousness. So clearly what he's saying here, this isn't just about how you spend your time. This is about money. And the point he's making here is about use money, which is not eternal and it's not truth. Use it in a way so that you have an eternal dwelling. And so that point almost becomes very simple here that he's making. That he's not trying to make a point about how a bookkeeper does money management or specific ways of acting shrewdly. What he's saying is, don't let businessmen and how they manage their money and how carefully and how smart they manage their money and their business outshine how hard you work at spending your money on good things and preparing in your life using even money which is meaningless in eternity. Use that in such a way so that it prepares you for eternity. And so he goes on and then he makes a spiritual application of that. In verse 10, "He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much. And he who is righteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust the true riches to you? And if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own?" And so he really brings this point home. I think if we understand now that context, he really brings this point home well. First of all, he says, be as diligent and as clever as a businessman when he works on his business with your money in the gospel and with your money in preparing for good things and using it for good things. Be successful in that in just as diligent a way. But then he goes on and says, to the degree that you do that, you are saying something about yourself, and it is a demonstration of faith. He says, if you are faithful in a little thing, money, you will be faithful in eternal things. And it says in verse 12, "And if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own?" Almost referring to money as God's stuff, that this is all God's stuff anyway. And if you're not faithful with this stuff that doesn't belong to you, that you're borrowing almost, who's going to give you that which is your own, something in eternity, a place in the kingdom? And so I hope we see that here, that this idea is very serious, that what we do with money now, what we do with what we're given now that is God's, says something about us and also says something about what our eternity is. A couple verses that I think are interesting in relation to that. The first one is in Matthew 19. If you look at Matthew 19, and we won't read the whole thing, but I think you know the story of the rich young ruler. And so Matthew 19 and we'll look at Matthew 19, verse 16, and it says, "And someone came to him and said, 'Teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may inherit eternal life?' And he said to him, 'Why are you asking me about what is good? There is only one who is good. But if you wish to enter into life, keep the commandments.' And he said, 'Which ones?' And this is kind of that situation again where he's asking, which ones should I keep? And Jesus told him. But then if we look in verse 21, it says, Jesus said to him, 'If you wish to be complete, go and sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me.' And so this is the idea that says if you want to prepare for eternity with your possessions, if you want to take what you have now and prepare for the future, give it to the poor. Sell it and give it to the poor. That's a demonstration of a heart of charity. And that's another thing that's pointed out in Luke 12. If we look there in Luke 12, this is in verse 29, this idea that we're familiar with. Do not seek what you will eat and what you will drink, and do not keep worrying, for all these things the nations of the world eagerly seek. But your Father knows that you need these things. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has chosen gladly to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to charity. Make yourselves money belts which do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. He says here, sell your possessions and give them to charity. This is how you prepare for eternity. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. If eternity is where your heart is, use your treasure for being ready to go there. So I hope you see here that the point he's making, and that it is not a difficult point, but you have to ignore the things that aren't the point. You have to say, what is he trying to tell us? And it is, do with wealth the right things that prepare you for the future. And I hope that makes sense. Now he says, maybe one of the most famous things he says in this parable comes next, and verse 13. Where it says, no servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. And this is just another way to bring that point home. You cannot serve both at the same time. And this is not necessarily, I should say, right now, a point to just rich people. This is about who you serve. I think it's interesting about the focus. If you're not rich, what do you serve? Where is your focus? What are you worried about? And what are you working on all the time? And once again, the point is not here that you don't support your family and that you don't work hard to make sure you're secure. This is about what takes your mind and your focus. I think it's very interesting that there are these people that we admire that have been just extremely successful businessmen. And I always use the example of Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett. Steve Jobs was one of the most successful businessmen in history and started an amazing company in Apple. But when you learn more about him, you realize, he was a really mean person. And he was totally obsessed with what he did and treated people like garbage. And you think, well, this is a person who was totally focused on his business and his craft, which made him amazing at it. You can't take that away from him. But he was a person who had terrible relationships and was just a big fat jerk. And I used to think, Warren Buffett, now this is a guy who still is a modest person, lives in a modest home. He's probably the example of somebody who made all his money, but did it in a family way and did it in a way that was more people-friendly. Then I watched a documentary on him and read some about him. And no, he is totally obsessed with money and absolutely focused. His wives, I should say, say that he is just completely disconnected and only thinks about money. And so I don't want to say anything about these people necessarily. I can't judge them, but I can say that they were obsessed with money, and that made them shrewd businessmen. And so sometimes you have to take the point from what Jesus said, that you have to change your focus, that if I'm going to have money, if I'm going to make money, it is for good. It is to do good things in the kingdom. And it says here, you can't serve both. You can't be a devoted servant of God and also a devoted servant of money. Those two things don't go together. And so there's some obvious verses we'll look at that I think help drive that home. First of all, back in Matthew 19, the second part there, after we hear the story about Jesus and the rich young ruler, it says in verse 23, and Jesus said to his disciples, truly I say to you, it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. When the disciples heard this, they were very astonished and said, then who can be saved? And looking at them, Jesus said to them, with people this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. He says here, it's really hard for a rich man to get into heaven. In fact, he says it's so hard, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. But he says, and they are like, then how can anybody be saved? Because they were making this relationship almost that rich people have good lives and that this is a good thing. But he says it's really hard for them. The other one is at Matthew 6 and verse 24, which says a very similar thing to what we read here in this parable. In verse 24 of Matthew 6, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. You've got to pick one. You cannot have your focus and your obsession be both God and money at the same time. It doesn't work. And so I hope you see here that there is not a complicated point he's making. Though there are some complicated components of this, the points are simple. We will be called to make an account. And how we make an account of our lives and how we spend our money will decide where eternity is. Prepare now for the next stage. Prepare now with your money and with how you spend your money and how you think about money. Use it now in just as shrewd a way as a businessman runs his business. Use it now in a way that is good and that fulfills God's purpose. And that, as he said in verse 9 of Luke 16, make friends for yourselves by means of wealth, by the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings. Use money in such a way so that God will accept you into eternity. Now, I just want to point this out before we're done, that even though he's talking to his disciples here, it's always like the Pharisees are listening in. Every time Jesus is talking, they're always checking in and listening. And it says in verse 14, now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and were scoffing at him. So they were hearing this, and they were clearly just thinking it was ridiculous. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts, for that which is highly esteemed among man is detestable in the sight of God. He says to them, you're scoffing at this idea. You think this idea that money should only be used for good and for preparing for eternity. You may scoff at that idea, but God sees your hearts. Your goal is to curry favor with men. It is to make sure that people like you. But he says God knows what's in your heart. And he thinks that the things that men believe are great, and we know this concept, we've seen it before, that the things that men believe are great are detestable to God. But God has a better way. So I hope this has been helpful to you. I just wanted to look at this because I believe that when we read it at first blush, it doesn't make the point to us until we really delve in and see what Jesus was trying to say here and what it means to us into our eternal lives. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope that you will continue to think about this and study this. But for today, we'll be done, and we'll look forward to just seeing you next time. We'll talk again next week.